So this is a panel about legal careers after Dartmouth. I will quickly introduce each of our distinguished panelists. Each panelist will share their experiences about their careers and advice for a few minutes. Professor Kalish will probe further with some questions, and then we will open it up to all of you. And it's great to see all of you here today on this beautiful, beautiful May day in Hanover. Sue Finegan, class of 1985, is a litigation partner and pro bono committee chair at the law firm Mintz. Appointed the firm's first pro bono partner, she serves as lead counsel on numerous high-profile pro bono litigation matters. She also manages the firm's pro bono efforts. She served as co-chair of the Massachusetts Access to Justice Committee, chair of the Massachusetts Judicial Conduct Committee, chair of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court's pro bono committee, and a member of the Massachusetts Judicial Nominating Committee. She also currently serves as vice chair of Dartmouth's Board of Trustees. From 2004 to 2007, she was the legal director of the Victim Rights Law Center, overseeing free civil legal services to sexual assault survivors and providing training to advocates nationally. She has been a tireless advocate and innovator in helping low-income people in Massachusetts and nationally. Judge John Mott, class of 1981, has spent his career in public service and the courtroom, working for individual liberty, civil rights, and justice. After graduating from Northeastern Law School, he worked at the Public Defender Service for DC. From 1995 to 2000, Judge Mott investigated and prosecuted hate crime, police brutality, and involuntary servitude cases around the US as senior trial attorney, deputy chief, and acting chief for the criminal section of the Civil Rights Division of the US Department of Justice. In 2000, Judge Mott was appointed to the Superior Court for DC by President Bill Clinton. He currently works at an international alternative dispute resolution firm where he serves as a mediator, arbitrator, and adjudicator on cases from around the country. Dave Lieberman is not a graduate of Dartmouth College.
Don't hold that against him.
But what's my most important affiliation?
I don't know.
My partner is Kathleen Powers, who is on faculty in the government department, which is hence my affiliation by proxy.
Very good reason.
Okay, excellent. I was going to say we won't hold that against you. But you are a graduate of the Ohio State University and Stanford Law School. He's an appellate attorney at the Department of Justice's Criminal Division in Washington, D.C. He's also served as appellate counsel to the United States Attorney's Office in D.C., deputy counsel to the vice president at the White House, and deputy solicitor general for the state of Ohio. Professor Julie Kalish is a graduate of Dartmouth College, class of 1991, but her extraordinary reputation as teacher, scholar, colleague, and community member is known to one and all here, and she also makes fun of me for long introductions. So that is it about her. Please join me in welcoming our panelists back to Dartmouth. Sue, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So do you want me to start when I was at Dartmouth too, or so do you want me to jump forward? All right. Well, I'll start with Dartmouth because I think it's important to have context. So I was a government major here at Dartmouth, and I would have been a public policy minor had they had one. The Rockefeller Center had just started here, but I took several public policy classes too. I knew I wanted to go to law school, but I wasn't sure. I was like 95% there. And so I took some time off and went to New York for a couple of years and worked in advertising and marketing and as a paralegal. And after 3 years of taking time off, which I thought was really important, kind of made me realize that I really did want to go to law school. I ended up going to law school at Boston College and really had a wonderful experience there. I spent a couple of years after law school as a law clerk, working for two different judges. One was on the trial court in the federal system, and the other was on the Supreme Court and the Massachusetts state court system. Also something that's an amazing opportunity if you get a chance to do, to work closely with a judge. I'm pointing to you, working closely with a judge, because this just gave me an opportunity to see what being a judge is all about and being a lawyer is all about. While I was in law school, I really wanted to be a public interest lawyer. Or do public sector work. But I realized after my clerkships that I had a lot of debt, law school debt, and that's a reality. I think back then I sort of thought that there was very black and white. You could either go to a law firm or you could do public interest or public sector work. And what I've learned now, 30 years later, is that it's pretty gray because my job currently today didn't exist back then when I graduated from law school. And also I have a chance to do a public interest job at a law firm. So I think that the takeaway there is that I think I was pretty, in law school, I was really concentrating on I really want to get a public interest job. But then the reality is that sometimes you have to make choices about your career path that you didn't really think you were going to make. And I ended up trying to choose a law firm that I thought would give me a lot of experience doing pro bono work and being around people who were like-minded in terms of working in the community and giving back to the community. And so I chose to go to my firm that I'm currently at, Mintz. And I was able to do hundreds of hours of pro bono work each year. I did a lot of work working with unhoused people and survivors of gender violence and a lot of immigration work. And about 10 years in, after making partner, I got the opportunity to work with one of my pro bono clients, an organization that worked with sexual assault survivors. So I was able to go from this big law firm and go into a really small, all-women, mission-driven organization working with sexual assault survivors, both in Massachusetts and nationally. So it was really an amazing opportunity to kind of pivot. But it really was kind of why I went to law school to begin with, because I really wanted to work in the public interest arena. And then about 3 or 4 years later, the firm called me and said, hey, would you ever think about coming back? I hadn't really thought about coming back to the law firm, but they basically said to me, we'll create a job for you where you can come back as a litigation partner. You can chair the pro bono committee. You don't have to bill your time, which is a big deal in law firm world. You have to bill your time for everything you do. And then you can basically pick cases that you want to work on. And so for the past 17 or 18 years, I've been able to do that position, work exclusively on pro bono cases with other people at my firm, and kind of take on cases that are interesting and impactful. I thought I'd give you 2 examples because I could go on and on, but I won't. The first example is I was telling some of the people at lunch today, some of the people I had lunch with, some Dartmouth students, about one case I got to work on was the travel ban litigation. So when President Trump first was inaugurated, about 5 days later, he enacted the Muslim travel ban. And I don't think he consulted with DOJ before he did it. You don't have to comment on that, but he didn't. We extremely unlikely. So anyway, I got a call on a Friday and said, "Listen, Sue, we are probably going to go into federal court tomorrow because some of the first planes are going to be flying in from other countries, and we likely are going to have a lawsuit that we're going to file on Saturday night in federal district court." So I kind of thought it was bizarre because you don't go into federal court on a Saturday night typically. But on Saturday night at 8:30, I got the call from some of my colleagues and basically said, you have to get to the airport right now. And you have to, come over because we're going to file a lawsuit. 2 professors from UMass are getting detained and we need to file a lawsuit immediately. So I raced over to the airport and then ended up they opened up the federal district court for us that night. We went into federal district court. Everyone had come in from various, someone was hiking, someone was at a kid's birthday party. No one was dressed appropriately for court at all, except for the judges who had robes on. And we ended up staying there till about 2 or 3 in the morning and got the most comprehensive order that was issued that night, because this was happening around the country too. So it was this really kind of a crazy experience. But at 3 o'clock when I came home that night, I said to myself, this is really a crazy situation, but it shows you the power of the law in that you could actually sue the President of the United States and be successful, at least temporarily, and get an order in place against something that was deemed unconstitutional. So that's one example. The other example is more of a policy-based case that I worked on. I do a lot of work with survivors of domestic violence and survivors of sexual assault. And we ended up representing this young woman who was a high school student, and she was sexually assaulted by 2 neighborhood boys. But under the current legislation, she wasn't allowed to go in and get a protective order. So she couldn't go to school without getting harassed by these 2 boys who had assaulted her, because they were neighborhood boys. They weren't part of her family, so she wasn't protected under the existing law for domestic violence. So we spent, with my colleagues and a bunch of advocates, we spent about 10 years and worked on changing the law such that sexual assault survivors and domestic violence survivors could actually go and get protection that other survivors could get. So those are just two examples of some of the kinds of cases that I've worked on throughout the years. So I'll stop there because I think I'm at my time.
Good afternoon. Nice to be here. My day started, partway through the day started with picking up Devante in Concord, driving up. So Devante, I'm sorry you will have heard some of these stories before, but it was a great ride up. Made the last hour quite enjoyable. I'll start with college as well. So I graduated in '81. It's a bit of a different institution in some ways then, and much the same. Everyone's journey, if you want to call it that, into the law, the people that are in the law journey is different, no doubt. For me, I went through the entire time in college and never once thought about law school, not even for 30 seconds, not at all. For me, being at Dartmouth was focusing on history and other courses that I loved. I was a cross-country ski racer for the Carnival team, my time here. And it was those two things and my friends. So equally important to me. But what ended up happening with me is got about halfway through senior year and thought, oh my gosh, what am I going to do when I get out? When I graduate. And I wasn't sure to continue with ski racing or not. And I ended up thinking, I'm going to teach school. I love history, international issues. And I went and taught. I went to public high school, but I went and taught at a boarding school near here called Holderness School for 3 years. Coached skiing and taught, developed classes on international issues, and always figured I'd go to graduate school for various reasons, but thought probably international affairs, something like that. And for some reason, I had the presence of mind I'm glad I did, after 3 years or partway through my third year teaching, think, I'm going to go to graduate school and do something in graduate school, but probably international affairs. But I'm going to take a year off in addition to this teaching and just do other things. And I worked in Japan teaching English. I traveled through South for 3 months. I traveled through South America with my brother, who was 4 years younger, in his early 20s, for 3 months, all over the place, over the Andes, down the Amazon, all over. Worked in Washington, D.C. for National Council for La Raza, which is a national Hispanic organization, leading organization. And during that time, had a conversation with a friend of my uncle's. My uncle ran Center for Community Change in D.C., which was a national housing organization that fought against redlining. It came down during the war on poverty. That's the sort of family that I grew up in. And this friend was Peter Edelman, Georgetown law professor. And he said, great that you're interested in international issues, but you really ought to think about the law. So at this point, I was 26 years old probably. And this was the first conversation I ever had with anybody about maybe going to law school. And why think about the law? Well, because it's a hard degree, he said. He called it a hard degree. And what he meant by that, as you might guess, is that it's a degree that has some currency. It means something across areas. So she said, sure, you can still go for international affairs, but in law school, you might find something that really interests you other than that, because there's lots of options. So I went to law school. I chose to go to Northeastern Law School. You may know about the co-op program there now for undergrads, which is unique and different and popular now. They had that same program for law school, so lots of work experience. I had 4 quarters of work experience in law school. And this is not a pitch for Northeastern per se, just to think about, though, if you're going to go to law school, what type of environment do you want to be in? I absolutely loved law school, loved it, which is not what everybody says after law school, I suppose. But you want to try to come out of it feeling that way. Really, you should. And I had the work experience. I won't go into great depth here, but U.S. Attorney's Office in the Southern District of New York, federal judge in the Southern District of New York, a boutique, I guess you could call it, law firm in D.C., and Senate Ways and Means Committee in Massachusetts. All that experience came out. I got my dream job out of there, Public Defender Service for D.C. What that means is representing poor clients, indigent clients charged with very serious crimes, mostly homicide cases for 7 years. And fighting to protect their liberty, protect their freedom, protect them from getting incarcerated if possible, push back against the government, because that's the way the system works. You had to have a strong defense. That's what it's supposed to. That's what Gideon versus Wainwright is supposed to mean. And that was a great office to be in. Great training, great experience, colleagues, diverse. Loved it. And then I left there to go across the street, in a manner of speaking, and to be a prosecutor at the Justice Department prosecuting civil rights crimes. The Justice Department Civil Rights Division has various divisions. Most of them are civil related, employment, housing, and so on, pushing back against discrimination in those areas. Criminal section is the one section of the Civil Rights Division, it's not the criminal division, but where we prosecute crimes, statutes that prohibit misconduct of various types, police brutality, hate crime, and so on, involuntary servitude. So that job involved traveling to various parts of the country. I had cases in Mississippi and California and the Midwest and New Jersey. Prosecuted a police officer burglary ring out of Palisades Park, New Jersey, which would be a whole story. Could talk for 40 minutes about that. But important cases. Many of them were high-profile cases. Many were not, but all of which really mattered, right, to the community, to the victims, of course. And it was exciting work, working with the FBI, investigating cases, trying to flip police officers, and bring cases to trial. And then, as mentioned, I ended up being acting chief for a while of that section and interacting with the Attorney General over matters. And it was exciting work, interesting work, example of the many things that in government that can be done. There's so many good, exciting jobs that mean something, that pay well enough. They pay well or well enough. You'll see. And I was appointed to the bench, and I'll just say that experience there was great. I'll talk about that later maybe, but 18 years on the bench. What I loved more than anything on the bench was mediating cases, and I was hired by this firm that I now work for, where I'm a mediator and an arbitrator. Mediator means helping people resolve their disputes, loosely speaking, that are either in litigation or heading to litigation. And being the arbitrator is like being a judge making the decisions, as judges do in a non-jury sense. But I'll just say that I had no idea in college, no idea 3 years later, no idea even when I started law school that I was going to fall in love with the courtroom work and criminal work. To me, that was just down to earth, exciting, and something that I wanted to do. But for somebody else, I mean this, it might be property work, intellectual property work. It could be any range of things. The law is so diverse. But the key thing to think about is, do you really want to go to law school?
So like my fellow co-panelists in undergrad, I had no idea what I wanted to be. I was a journalism major. I loved to write. And then I figured out that I also loved to persuade or argue. And law was sort of a natural pathway. Plus, I took a lot of science courses and realized that pre-med was not for me. So what does every failed pre-med student do? Like, think about law school. I went to law school. It was for me. I went to law school right from undergraduate. I would not recommend doing that. I think in retrospect, I would have taken a little time off to do something different, to challenge myself to do something that was not my forever job, but I was in such a race to get there. And that's one of my big regrets, and something for you all to think about before you go to law school. Is there some adventure that you have in your back of your mind that you've always wanted to do? Like, take it, because there's never going to be a better time to do so. Went to law school, graduated in 2006. Similarly, I was a law clerk for 2 years for a federal trial judge and a federal appellate judge. Great jobs if you go to law school, excellent training. And then my career after that has proceeded in 2 phases. I'm from Ohio. I went back. I worked for the Attorney General's office in Ohio in state government. My title was a Deputy Solicitor General, but that's a fancy title to mean I was working in the Ohio Supreme Court, much like the New Hampshire Supreme Court, on cases involving the state, like its office holders, its agencies, whatever was walking in the door. And that could be elections law, that could be education, environment. I did Second Amendment firearms, whatever was sort of consuming the time of the state in litigation in that court, my small office was a part of. And there's actually videos of me in my mid-20s in the Ohio Supreme Court on YouTube, losing like some spectacular cases and arguing things that I had no business arguing in my mid-20s. I had no business getting that responsibility, but it was great training. I did that for 4 years. And then I joined the Justice Department in Washington, D.C., and I'm almost at 11 years, which is insane. I'm no longer the young lawyer in the section. I'm now getting much in the upper half. I am in Washington, D.C. I split my time between New Hampshire and there. And my buckets of responsibility are really 3. So number 1, whenever there's a federal criminal case in the U.S. Supreme Court, somebody from my section, so me or one of my colleagues, works with somebody from the Solicitor General's office, it's another office, to represent the United States before the Supreme Court, which is amazing, incredible experience. One of my most memorable experiences was working on a case 2 or 3 years ago, involving the sovereign rights of Native American tribes. In particularly, the right to police their own lands. Can a police officer employed by the tribe stop somebody on a public road who committed either a traffic offense or some other criminal offense? And the Supreme Court held that, yes, that's part of their sovereign rights. The second bucket of work that I do is I represent the government in criminal cases in the various federal courts of appeal. So we're in New Hampshire, our regional federal court of appeal is down in Boston, but they're all over the place in Atlanta, in San Francisco, in Chicago. And I just, over the past decade, a crazy breadth of cases from violent crime, drug trafficking organizations, fraud. I have cases pending right now involving a fraudulent cryptocurrency scheme, involving some individuals who portrayed themselves as part of doing development work in Afghanistan, and were able to buy a bunch of like medical supplies or other things very cheap from U.S. companies, and they were supposed to resell them to Afghanistan at this low rate, but they in fact just resold them on the black market. I have another case pending involving 2 DEA officers who were convicted by a jury for public corruption offenses, perjury, falsification of forms, stealing property from people whom they arrested. And that's been incredible, the incredible breadth. Just in my narrow field as a criminal prosecutor, what I see is I never quite know what the next assignment is going to be. The last thing that I've done for the past 2 years is gotten a little trial work under me. I've been helping out with some of the prosecutions, some of the litigation in Washington, D.C., involving individuals who were charged with crimes on January 6th for occurring in the U.S. Capitol building or on U.S. Capitol grounds. And I think the government has charged over 1,000 people at the moment. And it's been a wonderful career. I keep wondering what the next chapter is going to be. And then I think I can't really envision doing anything else because my colleagues and there's probably 10,000 federal prosecutors across the country. We have some based in New Hampshire. They're wonderful. There's about 200 or 300 of us in DC, just in the criminal division. There's civil rights prosecutors that I think I wake up, I get a case, I get a problem, and I really try to figure out what is the right answer? What is the right answer under the law? What is the right answer under the facts? What is fair in this case? And then I have to go out and persuade my colleagues, my supervisors, that this is the right resolution. Sometimes I'm successful, sometimes I'm not. Then I have to go out and persuade a court, a judge. And that is sometimes difficult, but it is incredibly rewarding to see these cases, for me, matter. Criminal law, criminal cases matter, both for the society, for the victims. And so it is very easy for me to get up in the morning and to do this work. My big pitch is, if you're interested in public service, try to pursue it. I think it is rich, maybe not in ways that you can monetize, but it is incredibly, incredibly rewarding. And so look forward to your questions. We'll just give my required disclaimer. I'm here in my personal capacity, so any comments that I make are from me and will not represent the Department of Justice. So.
I really appreciate how all of you spoke about sort of the paths that you followed and how you got where you are. I think one of the things that our students think about a lot is, I mean, you didn't, Judge Mott, wake up and say, I would like President Clinton to appoint me as a federal judge. Yeah. How am I going to get there?
That would never have crossed my mind.
Never have crossed your mind. Exactly. Yeah. Or, I'm going to prosecute the January 6th insurrectionists, so how we all fall into our careers often is a little bit more circuitous than we might have thought when we were sitting out in your chairs. And so I really appreciate that you outlined some of that, and that you took away, that was my first question. So I'm going to move on to a different question.
Still talking about
yeah, you can talk about it. You can talk about it some more. I feel like I want to ask you some of the questions that I hear a lot from my students. And one that's been coming up increasingly frequently is about how do you live a life and a career in keeping with your own values. It's feeling very strongly like all three of you have found a way to, in your legal careers, live out your values. And that can't have always been easy to do. Maybe you're super lucky and that was really easy to do for you. But I was hoping that you could talk about that a little bit and maybe even share, if you're comfortable with it, a moment where you were facing a choice of, is this or isn't this something I believe in, something I want to do?
Want to start again?
No, go ahead.
I can
Go for it.
I can take the last one. So I view myself as a civil servant. I was a civil servant in the state of Ohio. I'm a civil servant now. In Ohio, I worked for 3 different attorneys generals of different parties. I am now on my 3rd administration in the Justice Department. When I go say, good morning, Your Honors, Dave Lieberman for the United States, they don't care what I think. I represent the government. And sometimes, whatever position the government takes is not where I would personally end up. That's part of the deal that I signed up for. Now, if it hasn't ever come to a point where this is the government's position and I say, I can't argue this, I have to resign. I don't, hopefully that never comes, but if it does, that would be the situation I would face. But whatever discomfort I have, and it hasn't come up very much, I get to be, as part of government, I'm involved in the conversation as to what the position should be. And I get to participate in that conversation and hopefully influence it, which all of you can if you join government. And sometimes it aligns, sometimes it's a little different than what I want, and that I'm comforted with that. The question you had, have you ever been faced with a situation where I had that conversation? The answer is yes. The federal government has a death penalty. We prosecute homicides, and we we seek the death penalty. That decision is made by the Attorney General. In any given case, and there's an entire process, there's a committee. Every attorney, myself included, has the right to not work on death penalty cases. We can inform our supervisors, this is inconsistent with my values. I had made the deliberate decision to not invoke that. I think that it's the law. This is what Congress provided for. I am a prosecutor. This is part of my job. And I think that I'm a fairly conscientious attorney. And so even in those cases, even with capital punishment, which is something that I struggle with personally as part of my values, I felt like I took an oath and I'm going to do the best job. And if I'm satisfied, I do the work, get to the end. This is what the department has said. I will go into court and defend that judgment. Colleagues have taken a different decision and have opted out. That is fine. That is their right. But it's something that I certainly struggled over with quite a bit.
When your students are asking about living their values, are you meaning, how do I have a career where I can live out something that matters to me, or and also stick with my values along the way? Is that they're kind of combined?
Yeah.
Is that how you take it?
That's how I take it. That the questions are, if I join such and such a firm, or if I'm going to be in this position and then I'm asked to do something, what am I going to do? I mean, we're usually having these conversations in my office in a what am I going to do? Not in a, sort of classroom philosophical kind of way.
Right. So there's a lot that can be said to that, right? First of all, you absolutely can live out. Depends on what your values are, but whatever they are, you can live them out in a career in the law. If you're thinking in that, if someone's thinking and asking that question, can you have a life, a family, a path where you can be comfortable enough to make ends meet and live out your values? Can you do that through the law? Yes, definitely. What you're hearing about government work is an example of that. And you can live a good life. You can have a decent apartment. You can go out to dinner sometimes. You can hang out with your friends and have your life and do work that matters. Absolutely, you can have it all in that sense. I mean, sure, you might not, have the penthouse or the Cadillac or whatever. So what? I mean, that depends. Now, somebody might want that. You might say, that's what I want in life. I want to be financially comfortable. I want to be wealthy. I've never seen things that way, but I grew up in a upper middle class family, and I never had to think about it that way. So I get it. There are different ways to think about the world, but you absolutely can have a career in the law. And we're talking about government, also nonprofit. Lots of advocacy groups. You can do work that you care about and do well. The second part about this, you run into there are issues along the way. I'll mention a couple that came up for me, and they're very different. One, I just thought about this for the first time in probably 20 years. When I was coming out of law school, I was looking around. I wanted to be a trial lawyer. I wanted the job in Washington, PDS, as we call it, Public Defender Service. But I wasn't sure I was going to get that. Applied to a bunch of places, and I got hired by. I got an offer from a lawyer in New York named Ivan Fisher. Now, Ivan Fisher is one of the very best trial lawyers I've ever seen, and he really was. He appeared in front of the judge who I was a student and intern for, named Vincent Broderick, who was a former police chief in New York, and he had a bunch of mafia cases. And Fisher was in there, and he was dynamite, unbelievable, fun to watch. And I met him along the way, great guy, and he offered me a position. And I thought about what that life would be like. And talked with some friends, talked with others, and decided to not go that route. And I'm very pleased that I didn't go that route. You can imagine. But it would have been a way to become a trial lawyer a different way. Death penalties come up in my life too, in the Civil Rights Division criminal section. You know, some of those statutes, penalty could be the death penalty. My decision along the way was to not get involved. I opposed the death penalty for lots of reasons. Fortunately, as mentioned, you know, that the policy is take the position you wish. And I respect both responses. For me, it was to not be involved. Even as acting chief, I was able to handle that role and defer those decisions to somebody else. As a public defender, you know, this gets to a central question about in criminal law. Now, how do you represent those people, right? Well, you don't become a public defender unless you can represent anybody who comes in. But was it harder in some cases than others? You know, because of what the person was accused of and what probably happened in some cases? Sure, very much more difficult. But you've got to do the job and work and push back and present the best possible defense for the person who's your client.
Yeah, I'll just add, you know, I've been lucky, like the past 17 years, I've been able to pick my cases, so I haven't had that kind of concern about that you mentioned, but it definitely comes up all the time in private practice, you know. So when I first started, I, you know, was working on this really like large like case involving a developer, and they were developing this land, and you know, you're just thinking to yourself, like, am I doing the right thing? And then, you know, you know, you can make, like, you're not the government, so you can't really make, your clients want to do what they want to do, but you can make, you know, you can make suggestions about, well, maybe you could develop it this way and keep this land open, and you'd get the same result. And so you can strategically work with your client to try to make a difference and make it more palatable environmentally. And then also, like, you know, I think if you're working for a firm, you also have the opportunity to, you know, if you're doing commercial work, you can also, you know, have a significant pro bono practice too, and do the things that you kind of love to do and are passionate about too. So that's another way to deal with it. And I deal with this a lot with my mentees at the firm now. Like sometimes they're asked to work on projects and they are kind of anxious about working on those projects. And so we talk it through, like how, you know, how much, you know, are they willing to, you know, and so sometimes the answer is refuse to work on that project, you know, despite what the, you know, what the consequences might be. And we talk through, like, how do you decline to work on a project in a way that will, you know, result in them still being, you know, admired for the work that they do and admired for the stance that they've taken. And most of the time, I'd say almost all the time, they've been respected for those decisions. So I think, I don't want to be Pollyanna-ish, but I think that you kind of have to know what your own moral compass is, and make sure that you stick to those values, whether it's, you know, balancing your work and family, or whether it's, you know, deciding to take a case that you might not feel comfortable with and you know you can't do the best job you can do. But I have been really lucky, like, because I've been able to pick the cases, but that's kind of highly unusual. So
Yeah, you have a great job. Great job.
I have a great job right now.
Great job.
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we have time for your questions, because you are the students who are thinking about going to law school. So I'm sure you have questions. Are we floating a mic? All right. So raise your hand, wait for the mic.
Hi, thank you. So being a lawyer has been my dream ever since reading To Kill a Mockingbird in 4th grade.
Great.
One of my biggest fears is the advent of AI. So a recent study at Princeton stated that the industry most exposed to new AI is legal services. And another report from Goldman Sachs stated that AI could automate 44% of legal work. New AI is already being used by a lawyer in Flint, Michigan, reducing hours of work in seconds. So my question is it a good idea to go to law school when AI could reduce legal jobs? And especially considering the legal industry's billable hour business model.
I guarantee you the world will always need lawyers. I was actually listening to a podcast similar about what jobs might be reduced, and there's going to be more automation. I'm sure of it, but at some point, you need somebody to make you'll always need a lawyer. There'll always be a judge who's making a judgment on what the right answer is in a given case. The other thing that I'm curious to see is, will AI replace writers, as in good writers, persuasive writers? I've been reading enough articles that you can put together a Wikipedia entry pretty easily and it looks credible. But that's a much different task than filing a motion with a court, talking about your client, talking about the facts of your case, trying to persuade the judge or jury in your case that the right answer is rule for me. Maybe we'll get there, but I just have this feeling that at the end of the day, there's always going to be a lawyer, there's always going to be a judge, there's always going to be a courtroom, there's always going to be a jury. Computers are probably not going to replace me. Maybe that's Pollyannish thinking, but that's my own.
I don't think it's Pollyannish. No doubt AI will have a profound effect. It's starting to now, and it will. But at least in the world we're talking about, the trial world, presenting cases and evaluating the evidence, I imagine it will not have much of an effect. It might be helpful in some ways, if some of the work, that's probably what's going to happen across the board. There'll be some writing that's generated, some drafts that are generated, and then you work off of that. But does that mean there'll be 30 need for say 30% fewer lawyers in 10 years? I doubt it. I doubt it. The world's complicated. There are issues. That's where lawyers come in. That's where actual people come in.
Yeah, I would agree. And also, if you think about it, most people in the country are not represented by a lawyer. Many of the state court systems and the civil system, you don't have a right to a lawyer. And if you went into an eviction proceeding, 95% or more of the plaintiffs, of the tenants, do not have access to a lawyer. So if you think about it, this whole concept of AI could be really helpful on the access to justice front too. And lawyers could be helpful to kind of guide how that's done. So there might be some opportunities there that, particularly for those who are unrepresented in the legal system, which are the majority of people in the United States today. There could be some real opportunities there.
Somebody had a hand up down. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. I had a question about, particularly in kind of public service and government, the side of law, avoiding kind of cynicism, maybe in the face of two different obstacles. So the first is kind of like the long timelines that it sometimes takes. So I know that you mentioned, for example, taking 10 years to sort of change the public restraint law. And then secondarily, kind of when decisions get handed down at levels maybe above yours or from the Supreme Court, I'm thinking like, particularly in a case like Dobbs, in your work with like sexual assault survivors, how do you avoid kind of letting those sorts of decisions and those kind of rapid changes to the law like demobilize you in the context of kind of public service and government work?
I'll start if you don't mind. So there is no question that our liberties are under siege right now, right? The Supreme Court is way to the right. See, I could talk about this now because I retired from being a senior judge because of the threats against our democracy. So I could say what I wanted to about that. This is a Supreme Court that would actually, the majority, like to put us back in the 1950s, if they could. They won't say it that way. This is my attitude. You're not allowed for the government to say. So it's tough, right? It makes things harder for anybody who cares about civil liberties, civil rights, justice, real justice. But all the more reason that people who have those attitudes get out there and fight for that. All the more reason. And things will change, eventually, I hope, if people fight. And it's across the board. It's this. I have a 20-year-old, 22-year-old, 26-year-old, right? All young men. we talk about things, I teach, I have an idea, it can feel awfully daunting sometimes looking out there. But the way that we kept above water and push back is to everybody, do their part in whatever area matters to them, so that things maintain, don't get worse, and do eventually improve. I mean, look at one of my sons is gay. Look at the changes in this country. It's perhaps many would want to push back on this, but look at the changes that have come in the last 15 years. Unbelievable changes, and still so far to go, right? The way you get the rest of the way is to keep pushing, even though it seems daunting at times.
Yeah, I'd underscore that, and just thinking just about the 10 years it took to pass that legislation. I mean, sometimes it takes a long time, and sometimes you have to kind of try different arguments and bring other advocates along with you. And I don't think we ever lost hope, because we knew it was the right thing to do. And so we just needed to either get the right survivors to come and speak to the various state legislators, or bring in a different advocate. Or actually what we decided to do is bring in all the Republicans into the table, because we realized, there are a lot of people on the Republican side of the State House that really believed in victims' rights. And so it would resonate with them. And we tried to get the criminal defense attorney bar on board as well. And once we got all those people in the room, we were able to pass that legislation. I don't think we ever felt that we would never. Maybe we were just optimistic to a fault in some ways, but we knew it was going to happen. But I will say that it is daunting right now. Like, there's just, over the last 6 years or so, I have seen it's just been this erosion of a lot of democracy, civil rights, and there's just a crisis every day. And so it's really hard as an advocate to sort of respond to that. You have crisis fatigue, because every time there's a front page news article, the Dobbs decision, for example, being one of them, the next day I have 100 emails in my inbox from 100 attorneys at my firm that want to try to change and do something and advocate. And so, you just have to have the strength to keep going. But that's why I think it's exciting, because you can, not that that's particularly exciting, but being a lawyer is exciting because you can pivot. You can make a difference, not in all cases, but you can make a difference, and you can work creatively. And, right now we're working with the Center for Reproductive Rights, and we're doing a lot of research and a lot of advocacy, and they're the national advocate on this issue, really trying to make a difference. So, it's kind of amazing to be a lawyer and be able to kind of focus on what you're passionate about and make a difference. I don't know, hopefully when I get cynical, I guess I'll retire, I suppose.
But the Dobbs issue, I mean, that's a perfect example, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what could be more devastating to most people in the room here probably feel this way. And yet, it's fighting back against it like that. It just has to happen, right? Can't give up.
Yeah.
And things will change for the better eventually.
Other questions?
Got one over here.
Is there a mic that I'm waiting?
Yes.
Hi, and thank you all for being here today. My question is a little bit more practical, I suppose. I'm wondering if you have any advice on choosing within the legal field, what areas you wanted to pursue if you went to law school not really knowing, and how you might have chosen that for yourself. I know in particular thinking about the amount of in-court time versus there's a lot of law careers that don't actually have any time in court. So sort of what point along your path you determined that, and what helped you do so?
I'll answer. It's funny, when I went to law school, I didn't have any lawyers in my family. I didn't really know any lawyers. I just assumed that everyone was in court, and that's what people did, which I think was a little short-sighted of me, because there's so many different things you can do. So what I would recommend is I would do as much, outreach to people who are currently practicing in many different fields, whether it's now or whether it's when you're in law school. Just kind of networking with people and find out what their day-to-day is like, and really do some self-reflection about what you're like and what you would like to do with your career. And I would ask them very pointed questions about what they like about their job and what skills you think are best for doing that job, because the legal field there's just so many different jobs. You could be a patent person and like have a PhD in computer science and just look at patents all day long. Or you could do corporate law, which is, reviewing, trying to deal with, finance and I don't really know what corporate lawyers do these days, but that's okay. Contracts and templates and things like that. So, and be strategic about like financial kind of situations. So it would just be good to just really reach out and find out what people are doing on a day-to-day basis, because your jobs are very, very, very different depending on what you choose.
One thing that you'll benefit from that I was just seeing at the start of when I graduated in 2006 is clinical education. Law schools have dramatically increased opportunities and actually require clinical education as part of the 3 years. And so I'm trying to think the last time I looked at Stanford's website. I mean, they had a criminal defense clinic, a criminal prosecution clinic, a Supreme Court clinic, a low-income housing clinic, a transactional clinic. At some point, they had a human rights clinic. And so between that and you would use your summers to try out 1, sometimes 2 internships or jobs, you will get some sense of what it's like to practice across in various different corners of the law. And then you'll come out, and then that'll give you a sense. You'll come out, first job out of law school. Do I like it? Do I not? And then keep course correcting along the way. And then I'm fairly confident, if you keep your eyes open, you will find something that is rewarding, that you will deeply love in the law. Because as I said, everybody needs a lawyer. Every facet of society that you might care about, there's some lawyer connection somewhere to it.
So I think about it this way. So right now, you don't have to, there's no reason to think, oh, I should know what I want to do, right? Even whether you're going to go to law school. All of us, I know some people go right to law school, and for some people that's the right thing to do. So there are reasons it can work out well. But the general advice these days is to take 2 years, but usually 2, 3, 4 years off. And that's time it's not to go be a paralegal at a law firm, although that could be fine. It's just to do anything, just do other things. Work in the law if you want, pursue other passions if you want. But then if you decide on law school, when you get there, that's where you explore. Even then you don't need to know. You work in the clinics, you take jobs in the summer that are interesting, and then you find your way. But we live at a time, right, where especially people in college these days really do feel like I got to make the right step next. If I don't do this right, if I don't do that right, I got to plan every minute. Really try not to do that. I mean, it's almost impossible, right? I know that, but try not to think about it that way. Think about, what is it that matters to me? What is it that I love? What am I going to pursue? What are my passions? And if you want to think about it in a practical way, that's what the law schools will see in the applicants. They'll see an applicant that's more impressive because they've taken time and followed something that they're passionate about, not working at a firm or for an agency doing the law necessarily even before law school, just doing something that matters to them. And you need to think about what matters to you, right? Because then you go to law school. What's the goal? To get to law school, to get a degree, to be a lawyer? Why? Why is that the goal? Think about it really seriously. Think about it that way. Why do I want to be a lawyer? Is it because it's prestigious? I mean, a lot of things are prestigious. But do I really want to do that? And what do I want to do in my life when I get that degree? What am I going to do that matters to me, that makes a difference in areas? I mean, everybody has a different idea of that too. But what is it that, and those are the kinds of questions I think you should ask yourself rather along the way. And by the way, only less than 5% of lawyers ever see the inside of a courtroom, ever.
Yeah, I would want to just jump on and tack onto that. It's that, it's so important to just understand yourself and understand how you like to have your days look. Are you somebody there are different kinds of legal jobs that can accommodate pretty much anything you can imagine. So start thinking about, am I somebody who really loves to be interacting with people all day long? I love sort of that vibrancy versus the person who finds that day totally exhausting and really gets their energy from, I like to be quiet and sit with time to myself. I'm describing myself right now. I like to be quiet. I don't multitask well. So when I found out that there was such a thing as a career clerk, oh my God. I can just research and write in a quiet little room all day and interact with like 2 people, maybe. And then I came here. But these are all things that, when you're taking those years away, and even if you're not paralegaling, which I also agree, like, don't do that. Do it if you want to do that. You're learning things about yourself. And like pay attention to those things. They're important. They might seem like they're unconnected to what you're going to go and do in law school, but they're really not. They really are connected.
There was a knock on paralegaling. I mentored a student a couple years ago. He loved the environment. He was a paralegal at the National Resources Defense Council, had an amazing time, and then went to law school.
That's not the kind of paralegal I'm talking about.
That's if you want to do a paralegal, find an organization, a legal organization that you care about, and then figure out like if that's where you want to get, like, see if they have any paralegal or law adjacent type jobs, and then you can get the best of both worlds.
Yeah, if you can get into NRDC, do that. One last question? We have time for one last question? If not, I'll ask. Herschel always has his last question.
Did I see you get back or no? Oh, okay. Are you really putting me on the spot here? It might be interesting to hear the best and worst advice that you've ever received on the paths that you've each described to us. So I will string out this question to give you 10 seconds. But the advice that it turns out was extraordinarily helpful. And then the advice that at the time might have seemed great and in retrospect strikes you as it's actually quite misguided, if such a thing.
All right, I'll jump in. I'm just going to go forward. I guess the best advice, I was talking about this at lunch. It seemed at the time was kind of crazy, but I remember thinking that I was trying to figure out what to do after my clerkships, and I really didn't want to go to a law firm. And I remember talking to my grandmother, who grew up as an orphan, worked in like a textile mill at the age of 15, and she said, "What are you, crazy? You have these great offers from these law firms. You have all this legal debt. Why don't you just try to pick one of the law firms that would actually make you feel comfortable, And at the time I thought, that's not very, I kind of want to just do public interest law, which would mean that I would have to give up my offers and hopefully get a job 6 months later, which was kind of crazy to think about with all this law school debt. So she ended up being right, and I ended up picking the right firm, because here I am today, working at that same firm in this job that didn't even exist at the time. So it ended up being the best advice ever. At the time, it made me feel uncomfortable, and I thought it was bad advice, but it ended up being the best advice. So.
Yeah. So the unhelpful advice in law school, it was sort of just maybe in the zeitgeist that you should go out for law review, and which I did. I got on it, and then I spent just countless hours in the basement of the library, site checking these articles and editing these articles, and I just didn't understand why this may be relevant to my future career as a lawyer. I'm actually still not sure that it's relevant, but I did it because that was what would catch the attention of employers. And I felt like maybe it was just a self-perpetuating over and over again, because that's what the employers did too. So I would encourage you to, if you think, I just don't think that I would find this rewarding, but everybody around me is saying, oh, you should definitely do that, that's probably a cue that maybe I shouldn't do that. The best advice I received was one of the incredible mentor, law professor at Stanford. And she once remarked in a similar talk like this, she said, so much of life is path dependent. And she pointed out into the crowd and said, all of you are making decisions or have made decisions in the past week or in the past month that will affect your lives in so many ways you cannot possibly quantify it. So basically just stop trying to game out the system. Stop trying to figure out where you're going to be in 5 years or 10 years. Figure out what you're passionate about. If you see an opportunity that doesn't quite fit within what you thought, the direction you thought you were going, be like, I can be passionate about this. They're good people. This boss, she's going to be a great boss. Take that. Because then you do that, you will have a more enriching life in the moment. You'll be, for me, a better lawyer in the moment. And that decision in itself will open up opportunities that I never possibly dreamed that I could have had. So basically live in the moment, make your decisions based on the information that you have right now about what you would enjoy, what you would be passionate about, and don't worry about the stuff that's coming beyond the horizon.
Plenty of bad advice over the years mostly about doing conventional things, and luckily I try to push it off. I do think often that it would have been a good experience to have clerked for a judge after I graduated from law school, as my colleagues did. You
became a judge.
Sure, but picking up on what was mentioned, this is about who you are, what matters to you, where you want to be in the world, and not feeling like you have to rush to figure that out. But do be thinking about that. Have that be the focus. And the rest will come. You're all going to do fine. And there are lots of good law schools. Take your time. Take some time off, and end up thinking about what it is that what is it you're shooting for and why. That's what matters. And have a good answer. And earlier on, the question about positions that we may have been in that were compromising or put us in an awkward spot with our own ethics and so on. It's about your integrity, right? Always, with everything. That's all that matters. The jobs will come. The jobs will come and go.
Great question.
Thanks to all of you.
Yes,
Thank you.
thank you.